thank you to Giusy and Chaly for spending some time with us today to kind of share your perspectives around what you're seeing and happening in the CPG industry today. But maybe let's just start from the very top, right? The consumer. Clearly, much is being written about the changing consumer expectations. And as leaders stewarding some of the most iconic consumer brands in the industry, you have a front row seat to the rapidly changing consumer and customer landscape. So would love to get your thoughts, maybe starting with you, Giusy, around how consumer behaviors and expectations are changing, and how, to what extent has COVID maybe impacted some of those, both in the short term, but over the long run?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me, first of all. Oh, COVID changed even more, but let's think of pre-COVID for a moment and for once. So already in the last couple of years, there's been a huge fragmentation of consumer needs versus the past, and especially the need of personalization, the need consumer and customer want something for them. Hence, of course, the offering, not just in products, but in content, in the proposition, has been much more difficult to really delight the ever-changing consumer needs. And then, of course, COVID hit, and there are a major disruption that will probably stay for a long time. The first one is, of course, the immunity trend that it's something in the mind of every household, every mom, every dad, and in general now every person. And give, of course, a totally new expectation of benefits and new expectation of new product categories coming. The second big trend is the working from home or being home. And we talk about our chat, everybody is refurbishing their home, but regardless, you have to transform your homes in offices, schools, as well as running the family, and not everybody has this opportunity. And of course, COVID brought an acceleration of digitalization and a digital start of every path to purchase and customer journey, even though the journey ends or go through a store or a retailer. But overall, I think the big wake-up call for all of us as CPGs is how you personalize your offering and your content to the ever-changing customer, how you tap into new trends straight away.
That's great. And I think what was key in what you just mentioned was there was clearly a systemic trend, which has not, COVID has, if at all, only just accelerated it. But the whole theme around personalization and building content, building relevant value propositions has been there for some time.
Absolutely, but I think it's been accelerated, and a more sophisticated usage of data, of course, is on top of all our minds. And all CPG company collect somehow first-party data or second-party data, customer data, but now the how to use it. Let's say that we have plenty of data. The utilization is really the art, and making sure that you have this loyalty loop, acquisition and repetition and loyalty, and we call it loyalty loop, that really will be the winning factor of a marketing strategy, or let's say a digital marketing strategy, because today there is no marketing without really a digital in the world.
That's great. Maybe Chaly, just maybe bringing you into the discussion. You've obviously, like Giusy, have a very illustrious career in brand management and then in general management and strategy with Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, and others. Curious from your perspective, as you've been kind of at the front line over the past few years at Coca-Cola, what are some, how do you see CPGs responding to these changes, right? What are some of the most important capabilities that will be essential to advantage as we look at the next 5 to 10 years of the evolution of our industry?
So I think, over the last call it 50 years, CPG has done a great job of being consumer-driven, brand first, right? And the way that CPG has continuously invested inside of the brands and made that consumer connection, that's going to continue to be just as important as it ever has been. What I think is really changing and what COVID has accelerated is the speed at which we have to change the relevancy of the brands and the connection with the consumer. And the good news is, I think CPG is responding to this. If you look at innovation lead times, what used to take a year or 18 months, we're now, really speeding up as an industry so that it's 6 months or less. It should be 4 weeks, but we're still at 6 months or so. I think the way that we connect with consumers, what used to be, we're going to ask a whole lot of people their opinions, they're going to tell us what their opinions are, and then we're going to build one phenomenally big national campaign that everyone's going to see. That model doesn't work now. And I think CPG has done a good job of helping understand how to yield data and how to create creative that is more specific and more individualized. But I think the biggest change for us that we're still not really ready for is the change in how consumers shop. And we've been talking about this for 20 years maybe, but COVID so accelerated the way that consumers think about occasions and needs and how they then fulfill those needs with how they get their products. And that's something that I still think we're dabbling in as an industry, but we need to very quickly figure out how to make the same kinds of connections that we've been making with our retail partners over the last 20 to 50 years in that new omni-channel environment.
And I think we would like to spend time more on the whole omni-channel experience in a moment, but you touched upon something very interesting over there around how brand marketeers can really adapt how you did brand marketing before and kind of embrace some of these digital platforms to drive creative idea generation and activation. And in that same perspective, what other touch points can you will build equity with consumers? Curious, maybe thoughts from both of you as you guys are as stewarding such iconic brands and businesses forward. How are you guys thinking about that interplay?
So I can start, and I'd love to hear Giusy's opinion too. I think, the idea that brands on the whole only are relevant for how people think about them is timeless, right? And I think, certainly when I entered CPG, it was really about big brands. It was about the fight over big brands. Is it Pampers or is it Huggies? Is it Pantene or is it Dove? Is it Coke or is it Pepsi, right? And the last 10 years has taught us something very different in the US landscape. And that different landscape has been smaller brands have been able to take a substantial share of market, and private label has been able to accelerate a substantial share of market. And when you look at what's driving the growth of that, on the smaller brands, it's been a different marketing model. It's been not a large campaign that I mentioned earlier. It's been, how do I connect more locally? How do I find a niche proposition that fulfills a need that hasn't been there before, and find new ways for the consumer to find out about me as part of a discovery process? On the other side, private label has used a very effective retail strategy, right? It's born out of the retail industry. So of being able to be present and being able to compete with national brands in ways that 20 years ago people wouldn't have imagined. And so if you look at the likes of Simple Truth or Kirkland, for most consumers, these are brands, but they haven't created that same level of relationship with a consumer that the small brands have. And so we've got two different approaches that are happening in CPG that really lay out the need for big brands who can't really utilize either of those, but have to use a blend of both of those to find new ways to remain relevant, to find new ways to create consumer relationships. And I think the path to that is through data.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And if I can add, I think a platform, social platform, have enhanced and allowed a small brand, which by the way are not brand, are people, usually created by beautiful stories of people that put their experience at the back of the brand, and social media platform or social platform, plus the commerce capability of social platform, have enhanced their ability to be out there and connect first on a small circle or local consumer or possibly friends in their small circle, and then enlarge their sphere of reach and really put their story there. And while individually they may be small, not scalable, they combine is of course one of the threats or wake-up call, let's call it this way, to the big CPG brand, and welcome those brands, first of all. So the point of entry is less difficult than before. And again, I think social commerce played a huge role, that big CPG brands really didn't have this right mix at the beginning because of the relationship with large retailer, because, you know, we only know how to do big things. And we have to use a blend of levers, to Chaly's point.
Giusy, maybe just staying with you on that point, you obviously have a really illustrious career to date and experiences, having started your career at Johnson & Johnson, at Kimberly-Clark, Amway now, but you're also on the board of Carter's and, you know, some great organizations. And that, you know, it gives you an opportunity to kind of look at going to that omni-channel view, right? You kind of both through your position on the board, but also through the businesses you've been on. Earlier, you know, we talked about COVID accelerating the growth of e-commerce, of the digitalization by 6x. And a lot of brands are building out these new direct-to-consumer businesses or greater intimacy. What does that mean for the traditional relationship that brands have with retail channels and these platforms? Just curious to get your thoughts.
Well, obviously, it depends on you touch all these companies. They're so different. If I think about Amway's direct selling, the largest direct selling in the world, Carter's has its own retailing. So retailers have their data, their stores, correct? So I would say a point of advantage versus the massive CPG that have those relationship with and dependency or partnership with the Walmart, the Amazon, the Costco, and the Target. And so they're very different omni-channel levers that they can play. For sure, in CPG, you really have to partner. So you move from a customer relationship to really a partnership relationship for a common growth agenda. And so joint business, a partnership and planning to really unleash the power of common data to delight this shopper that are also in many cases customers of consumers. I think this has been an evolution in the last 10 years, but even more so the usage of common data to really offer content and products that really delight the shopper at Walmart. There are slightly different than the Target shopper, of course, the Amazon. And I think the personalization of the content is fundamental because it's come from CPG. And so the ability out in automation to personalize and mix content with as fast as a nanosecond, and then offer even a pack count on the ad or A or B or whatever online that is for that customer. And then a buy now or anyhow, a download a coupon or follow through this customer through the locking the sale at the store. And all of this CPG is totally trackable, correct, with a sort of attribution, which though is expensive and difficult and require performance marketing capabilities that I believe every CPG now has ramp up. Very different in retailing. Think about it, you have your thousands of stores where hopefully you have your own data and your own commerce data. And so the retailing industry was probably the most sleepy because they didn't have to have all these fights. And of course, with COVID, they have been extremely accelerated. And we can see those ones that made it through and those ones that did not make it through. And I think, again, the unleashing the power of the data that a retailer has is a big shift. So moving from being the best in style, design, and merchandising to be the best in managing the customer data, because you have it. It just didn't, that richness, CPG doesn't have it because they don't have this direct relationship with the customer. And then finally, I want to say direct selling for me that was the most surprise of all, because they totally depend on the business owners. But these business owners have the relationship with the customer that before COVID was totally face-to-face. And for COVID became totally online in a week. And that's the power of private entrepreneurial that are resilient and need to survive. And in order to survive, they transform the way they have a relationship with the customer from offline to online in no time, of course, with the support of the company. And that is the most powerful relationship because they know their customer, they can talk to them live, and but very, very different models, yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the direct selling model was, a lot is spoken about platforms, but that really was, it can be viewed as a platform as well, yeah, for drive consumer intimacy. And very analogous in some ways to the platform, Chaly, at Coca-Cola with the bottling system, right? The franchise. So curious from your thought to get, thoughts from both of you around what's the role of collaboration or these platforms going forward, right? How do you guys, and maybe going back to the capabilities that would be important, is it important really to for CPG companies to think about building all of those? Or is there a model there for better partnership with these and to create these new next generation platforms that allows CPG brands to engage with consumers, collaborate with customers in different ways? Would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I can start. I think that the thing that will need to be created is what is the consumer relationship of the future that a brand has, and the paths to that consumer relationship really are where the platforms then start to become the most relevant, right? So whether that's a direct-to-consumer platform or if it's a B2B platform that ultimately lands to the consumer, I think that for the short to midterm, there's going to be hybrids, right? And brands will only be successful if they participate well on the hybrids. But what the real driver of this, and I think the real threat for CPG on the whole, is the brand relevancy, right? So if in an environment in which consumers are increasingly accustomed to having everything customized for them, whether that be their watch list, whether that be what pops up in their inbox, brands that have traditionally relied on mass market customization and then found a variety of platforms to work through, that's going to be a lot harder to do and still remain relevant. So I think that the key is inside of each of the platforms that a brand participates in, how does that relationship stay fresh? How does it remain or become increasingly customized, if not personalized? And then how do you drive the collaboration that benefits mutual parties when you have a multi-party platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you measure all of this, correct? That's pose a huge pressure on new capabilities that CPG have to build and data analytics, because again, we have plenty of data, but how do you measure a use case and repeat it, if it's even measurable in the future? Because again, there will be so many customization and personalization, to Chaly's point, that potentially, would be impossible to say, oh, I measured this consumer target and this is the creative and this is what I gave them. Let me repeat it again. I mean, the fragmentation is really staggering. Another thing that is changing because of the platform is the role of agency partners. And now they have to, I call it create with a media first approach, because where the customer and the brand are together can be very different if they are on a Facebook property or Instagram or a WhatsApp or a WeChat, and how you really tailor this powerful relationship for the platform and be relevant for that. And I think it changed very much the way we do develop a creative idea from what we call the big idea to really an idea that works in every single channel.
That's great. And I know both of you touched upon data, and I was resisting getting there because I know that's really the core of in our prior discussions we've had in preparation for this. You guys talked about this, but I think this might be just the opportune time to go there. Candidly, what excited me about today's discussion was the fact that both of you, as you kind of have been champions for data, right? Giusy, when you kind of took on recently, as you've taken on new and bigger CMO roles, the very first thing you kind of tend to do is kind of go and build a data strategy, which is very different from what a traditional CMO would do. Similarly, Chaly, as you kind of took on the head of strategy planning role, you were a trailblazer for data and analytics and the power of data within Coke. Maybe just taking a cue from what you guys, what role does data play in enabling this, and what would be your advice, right? I think everybody's got the memo that data is important, but what would be your advice to CPG leaders as they think about data, right? How should they look to embrace this data-driven culture and make it part of their DNA? Maybe start with you, Giusy.
Yeah, for once I start. And yeah, it's true. When I had my first CMO role at Kimberly-Clark, oh God, it looks so long time ago, but I really said, hey, we have to have a vision of first-party data, correct? Like a big goal. Every CPG had it that year, billion, a million, you name it, correct? How many moms, how many families, Unilever, a billion people from P&G, and there's been a lot of part of their strategy. But I think beyond the vision is the how. It's really tough because when you are a CPG, you are usually 100 years old and you have different data platform and you have different usage of data, usually internal sales data, analytics for forecasting. But when you have to activate a customer, of course, providing everything is compliant with all the ever-changing regulation is really become very simple because you can really swim in ton of data. And so really partner with whoever is the data platform or the data lake, or and the social media, so the media portion that could be internally or externally, with an agency or without an agency, to really activate a use case. Activate really, okay, let's understand who should be our consumer target, what it would be more profitable or more faster growing, or would be the consumer target that build the majority of the equity. So in the case of a mom, correct, when it's pregnant, is very important, but doesn't give you any revenue, but it's super important to build the revenue of the year after. It's one strategy. You really build the connection with this mom at early stage and through a differentiating content. But super important to have the right partners on the table. And I have to say that when you're a CMO or a marketer, your left or right hand is research and development, correct? Product development, research and development. Well, today, your left hand is a CTPO or a CIO or a marketing technology, because they go together. So I invite all the new marketers and CMOs to really build a strong relationship with the information technology or technology platform officer and really drive it together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's the consumer research of yore, which required you to have a really good connection with a bunch of different agencies, is the IT group of today. And I think it's a good way to think about it. I think kind of building on what Giusy said, probably the more critical component in the future is not the data itself, because I would argue that retailers, at least in the midterm, are going to have more data than any CPG will, and will understand more of the interchange than any CPG will. And this is going to sound dated, but it is really the truth. It is, what do you do with the data? What does the data give you insight about predictability, about what trends are going to happen and what consumers need or believe that they need, that then you can find a competitive advantage for. And so data is the basics. It's the foundation of the house, right? You have to be able to have the data and be able to wield the data. But the power for CPG comes in the ability to understand something different that the data tells you, and to be able to extract some type of new insight. And the good news is, CPG brands have been doing this for a long time. This is just a different way of approaching it. And to the point that Giusy made earlier, it's also tons and tons and tons of data. So sifting through it and trying to figure out what is the most critical component, and then what does it tell you to do that's different? That's where the real power of data comes in. And that will also separate companies in the future. The companies that can do that well will be able to accelerate. The companies that drown in data or can't figure out what the right metrics are to look at or can't find predictability, they're going to fall behind.
That's helpful, and I think spot on. The second part of that equation, obviously, we talked a lot, the other part of the equation, we talked a lot about what's happening with consumers. We talked some about what's happening from the customer landscape perspective. And then we talked about data kind of being the key enabler to collaborate better with and more effectively with them. The other part of that whole equation very often is the talent, right? And the organization. And would love to kind of get your thoughts and your views as you look 5-10 years out in this real data-driven evolution of how we manage business, drive growth, innovate. What's your view on the talent and the skill sets that will be necessary for the CPG of the future? Giusy, I believe you're...
Yeah, it is. It's mute. Okay, first of all, we still need a very strong brand marketer that can drive innovation in terms of regular product innovation, and then we need marketers that drive digital product innovation. They're just products, just call it in a different way, and of course, they're both powered by data. We can divide the two, capabilities. Again, some CMO are called CDMO, like myself. So I have very strong insights, innovator, very strong digital marketer, so digital enablement, very different skill set, and of course, how you pull it together. But and I think this is very important. Overall, the recipe that's very fundamental is their curiosity, their ability to keep themselves up to date and out there. So I always be a believer that the team has to go out to conferences to again have the right partners, which are not vendors, are really partners to learn and absorb every day the new changing world, and then be themselves very involved in of course, digitally, even if you only work on innovation and products and brands. I mean, I think there are not any more marketing courses or digital courses. That's really the ability to grow yourself into the role and to very advanced in capability at any level. And I think for us as a CDMO or CMOs, it's the same. Of course, you have to be a leader, but you really need to know more than the past. I wouldn't say the details, but the big elements of what is going to drive the business.
I want to build on that because I think that is, it's very well said. I think I'll make a word here. I think holisticness is going to be one of the key capabilities for talent for the future. And here's what I mean by that. I think Giusy did a really good job talking about digital and marketing and how those two disciplines, which not too long ago were very different disciplines, right, have really now very quickly come together to a more holistic discipline. I foresee that that's going to happen very quickly in other parts of previously traditionally structured organizations. So the sales team, and I've had all these jobs. So I've been in sales and I've been in marketing, I've been in commercial and I've been in field, and everyone thinks a little bit differently, right? And you need that depth so that you can hone a craft that's very specific to get the job done, right? However, I think increasingly in an omni-channel, omni-digital, personalized world, you can no longer stay inside of a box that is defined by I am a fill in the blank, right? And by that, I mean like marketer or salesman or what. So what you really need to be able to think through is walking around the consumer pattern, right? So how the consumer thinks about the brand, how the consumer interacts with the brand, what the consumer pays for the brand, who gets in the value chain for the brand to get the brand into the consumer. All of those things are becoming much more intertwined than they ever have been. And I think successful CPGs of the future are going to do a much better job training early entry participants into the industry on how to think about that versus just understanding how to write a core creative brief or just understanding how to write a call plan. I think we'll still always have some levels of arguments between marketing and sales and finance and ops. I think that's relatively healthy, but we need to have much more well-rounded managers who can kind of think around the problem, keep the consumer at the center, and understand the different pieces of the value chain and the relationship that the consumer has with the brand. That's what I think is going to be a real differentiating factor for the talent force of the future.
And I guess maybe a related question that came in from the attendees as well is when we talk about these different groups within the organization today, different stakeholders, different constituents have different comfort levels with technology or with data. Curious from your perspective, as you guys have been upskilling and bringing your organization forward and trying to take this holistic approach, how do you create stickiness using holisticness phrase, Chaly, that you used? How do you create that stickiness to both for the highest performers, but also the lowest common denominator of talent who takes a little longer to kind of get there? Just curious from your perspective and experiences you guys have had and how you've.
Yeah, well, in my recent experience, I mean, the metrics drive a little bit everything. It's customer acquisition, customer retention, or NPS. I mean, it's really everything about the customer. If the company as such, from the leadership team, like at Amway, has customer at the center, through the business owner in our case, of course, but as a customer acquisition, customer retention, and happiness, happy loyal customers, as a metric, as a pay metric, or at least as a really a big goal, inspiring, then every single department should activate it against it. And that's how we treat there is always a data analytic, function. And I'm a big believer that this function should serve, again, this customer activation and loyalty function and really solve the business problems that would would drive toward this objective versus just analyzing the ocean. To Chaly's point, that's really the risk. And so in general, if they are under CTPO, under CDMO, or under CFO, again, what do they do for a living should be measuring and tracking and helping each department to acquire loyal customers.
Yeah, I think building on that, not everyone needs to be able to run Python, right? Like that's not the answer. And even though we definitely need those folks, and thank you folks out there for being able to do that. I think the real key is the thinking. So it's thinking about the data and thinking about what are the intelligent questions that we want the data to answer. And that type of analytical thinking, I think, is an entry point, regardless of what function you have. If you're in HR, you need an analytical entry point to be successful in CPG going forward. And so I think it's more about the structure of the thinking than it is about the hard skills. That said, I think that, today you're hard pressed to get through an MBA if you don't have a lot of hard data skills as well. So I do think that is an entry point for the future that will continue. But I think that the focus, regardless of if you're numeric or data literate, or the focus needs to be on the thought approach and on the how do I have a good analytical thought process that can get my brand to have a tighter connection to the consumer, or that can find me a little bit more profitability in this spot or in this spot.
Another question that came in was around, we talked earlier about the omni-channel experience. Again, with COVID accelerating the digitalization of commerce, there's been a lot of focus around building that direct consumer engagement. And in that context, looking at D2C, right? Curious to get your thoughts around what role does D2C play in that? And maybe an add-on question from my perspective, as CPG leaders, how do you manage that channel conflict, right? That could potentially come up in those instances.
You want to go first? Well, first of all, again, regular CPG, of course, has sometimes have D2C really for data acquisition, not for real revenue, correct? So website on app to, gather customer excitement around some programs, some promotions, some sweepstakes, and have the purpose really to acquire data. In the case of let's say, again, I was talking about direct selling because it's a direct relationship with the business owners that has a relationship with the customer. It's a very, very strong relationship. And of course, this gives opportunity to have data in a much broader way. I believe that today retailer, so the Walmart, the Target, the Costco, are much more comfortable with big CPG having their own direct-to-consumer brands or specific business within a brand, again, because the scope here is not to take sales out of them. It's really potentially to bring more customers that are in line with the Walmart shopper into their wall or their website. And so again, if the intent is clear, there's not this conflict of interest. It's really a way to know the customer. The other area of direct relationship with consumer is consumer insights, which are fundamental for innovation. And of course, you want to hear from your consumer straight away. And there are two ways. One, which I love, is really social listening, and then a direct relationship with the customers that try new products, give a new idea, and are your gigantic big panel that you can innovate against it in a much quicker way, or test, your creative. So I think, again, that different intent is not definitely a revenue generation against the retailers.
So I think this is a big question for CPG, right? Like how do you do this? And if you look back at the history of commerce, you used to, go into town on market day and you'd go to the butcher, the baker, or the candlestick maker, and you'd get your stuff and then you'd go back home. And then came the advent of the grocery store where you just did one-stop shopping, right? And so that's really kind of what we're talking about, right? Like it's the same thing, it's just in a digitalized environment. And, you establish the relationship when you were going to the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, you established the relationship with the butcher. The butcher knew a lot about you. He knew how you wanted your meat. He knew what you ate on Thursdays. And you had something that was pretty special and differentiated, right? And that's where I think a lot of retail commerce has gone now, is like you can think about Stitch Fix, right? Where you establish a pattern and the AI then starts to figure out for you what you might like, and then that becomes a business model in and of itself. I think that the key for CPG is how do you establish something that makes it worth it for the consumer to go to you? And, why wouldn't I go to Target or Walmart or Costco or to get what I need? Because I can get 1,000 things at one stop, even if that stop is on my phone. So then it has to be something that's really beneficial for the consumer. And it might be, and I think that CPG can figure this out, but in order to cohabitate in both a retail environment and a direct-to-consumer environment, there has to be something in it for the buyer, right? The consumer has to have something that's special and different versus getting something from Target. And so then you've got lots of different choices. You've got innovation choices, you've got packaging choices, you've got premiumization choices. There are lots of different ways that you might find the right niche that can enable you to coexist peacefully, if not always super peacefully, with a retailer. But I think the bigger hurdle in some instances is how do you get the consumer to care enough about your set of brands that they don't want to, because they may just want one other thing over here, and that may be enough of a barrier for them not to have a direct relationship with you. That's the key.
That's great. And, I think, and well said by both of you, with the consumer, winning with the consumer, making sure we have relevant propositions, we collaborate better, more effectively with our channel partners to kind of make that value very apparent to each and every one along that node becomes important. I wanted to shift gears a little bit, maybe just talking to some of the things you mentioned earlier around how do we, one of the other, maybe if there was a benefit of COVID internally within the organization, was the delayering or the agility that it kind of forced, right? Curious from your perspective, maybe starting with Chaly, since you kind of have had a much broader remit, how should CPG companies be thinking about embracing some of those? You talked about getting demand signals, getting some of the consumer insights at real-time speed, and then activating it across. Curious from your perspective, some of those behavior changes that you observed or implemented, which of those do you think need to kind of stay beyond the current pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, because I think everyone wants to know, like, well, once we have, at some point, once we have a vaccine that works, what happens then? And do people still watch the same level of streaming that they're doing now? Do they still have house parties? Are they going to go back out to dinner at night? All of those kind of forecasting questions that no one can accurately predict now. I think that the thing is really in nimbleness. So consumers are fickle in a lot of their behaviors anyway. And so the brands that win in that are the brands that can respond quickly and that can respond in a timely manner. So there's two different things. Quickly means I can pivot, and the timely manner means I'm able to provide the offering at the right moment, right? So when COVID first hit and grocery completely changed overnight, with the food service dropping off, almost immediately, and suddenly you had huge boons. We all realized as an industry that the most important people were in supply chain. And we all realized suddenly that, wow, we've got to really think differently about how to get our products into the hands of consumers because they really need it. This is now a fundamental change, especially inside of food and beverage. But if you think about then how much of that also accelerated trends that we already saw happening, like digital commerce, right? We saw that trend happening a long time ago, but it accelerated because of a pandemic. So the brands that were able to win quickly, prepared, they were able to act nimbly, but they were timely in their response. They were able to move at the right time to make the change. So I think as we go forward, it is about listening to the trends, and it's also about predicting to some degree where things are going to go. But no one has a crystal ball, and we're all going to get stuff wrong. So the criticality for companies going forward is to be able to have structures and processes that enable you to move very quickly and then to put things in market at the right moment so that consumers can take advantage of, oh, that's just what I was looking for. I didn't know that. That's what you want. You want that consumer to have that moment of aha right when you're offering them the brand that or the product that they were looking for, how they want it, when they want it, how they want to get it.
Absolutely. On a different area, things that potentially will not change for a long time is the attention to health and wellness and sustainability. I mean, there's been a massive shift on consumer behavior, on food habit, attention to what you eat and what you drink, your beverage, your sustainability, especially from the young and the older generations. And this may not change back for some time. So the ability of brands that did not pay attention to that to operate and compete in certain new categories or becoming significantly more healthy, that's definitely something that should be planned. I don't think it will reverse back. And just the request from a young generation of sustainable brands, a sustainable proposition is massive. It shouldn't have been COVID, the factor to make big companies to react to that, but I'm glad that happened. And then you're right, we don't have a crystal ball. There could be another pandemic in 5 years. You really don't know. The ability to be nimble and to act as a startup. Think about in the past, we were buying media upfront. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and really, in every decision you made, with spending, with planning. I think the planning is a much shorter term than it was in the past. It probably changed the way we have to plan.
It's amazing. I'm sure we can keep going on, but I have one final question, and then I'll kind of maybe hand it back to Ellen. And that's really kind of, as you guys, as leaders in the industry, as you look to somebody who might be coming into the industry now, what might be a couple of things or words of guidance that you would want to provide to a new brand marketer who's joining a Johnson & Johnson or joining a Procter & Gamble today, as they look to kind of be in your inherit your responsibilities in several years? Just some parting thoughts.
I think customer centricity is even more so. It's really their job. Let others do the other area like cost controlling and innovation. Be highly innovative, yes, data driven, but also extremely creative. I think they're a very tough job today. It was much easier when I started long time ago in Johnson & Johnson, Italy. But today they are fantastic jobs, and just also have fun. These are great, and potentially choose also wise, the brand and the company that also fit the value of your values?
I would say three things. First, I think know what the brand stands for. And I think to Giusy's point, like choose wisely so that you feel good about the brand that you're working on and you understand why consumers pick that brand and you can nurture that. And if you don't like it, then you can change it, right? Like find that too. The second thing, and I think that this is probably alongside of the holisticness that I referenced earlier, but understand the value chain. Where is economic value created from what the consumer wants to pay for the product all the way back to what it costs to manufacture the product. We have far too many managers who don't really understand that. And I think if you start off having a good understanding of where economic value is created, you have a much better likelihood of having a higher return on your investment, regardless of what the investments are. And I think the third thing is, learn and grow. Like the most amazing thing in my mind about CPG is that, there are zillions of things that can be done. And you're constantly learning how a consumer wants to respond with something that people touch and feel and drink or put on or every day. And it's a great opportunity to grow, but you have to figure out how you want to grow and be intentional about it. And I think that that's something that is great for any industry, but I think it's particularly great for an industry that moves as quickly as ours does and has such a personal relationship with basically everybody.